Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of Rivals on Gran Turismo Sport in particular, and this time we're actually revisiting a Rivals match from earlier on in this same series from Gran Turismo 6 between these two same cars, arguably the two top tiers of the JDM tree, the R34 Skyline and the Supra RZ. Fierce rivals on the same level, if not greater than, the Evo versus Impreza or the Viper versus Corvette, various other battles that have been going on for a long time. This is one of the top battles, one of the most hotly debated battles, and both cars definitely have their strengths and weaknesses. Now, it had an interesting outcome on Gran Turismo 6, for those who are around to watch that episode, but how about now? Because both cars are, in some cases, drastically different to what they were like on Gran Turismo 6, not just in terms of specs, for instance, on paper, but also, of course, the way that they actually perform, the speeds that they can reach, the handling, the fact that the Supra, for instance, is now a premium, which in itself is a massive difference. So, as usual, we'll first of all discuss either car on its own, in a performance vacuum, if you will, just to consider what it's like to drive, its good points, maybe some bad points, and then of course pit them head to head in a top trumps best and biggest is best kind of battle to see which one comes out, at least for the fun of it, on top on paper. And incidentally, these will be, as always, in fully tuned form, which I know some people don't understand, but the reason why is because this is just for fun. So if it's just for fun, you might as well give it the biggest and best numbers they can get. So let's get straight into it. First up then, we have the slightly older of the two in terms of how long it's been on Gran Turismo Sport, the R34 Skyline. This is a great performance car on the game. Of course it was going to be a great performance car, it's arguably the most OP vehicle of the entire franchise, and it doesn't disappoint. If you're an R34 fan, it's still great. It's not as fast as it used to be, in particular compared to Gran Turismo 6, but then again, what vehicles are? They're pretty much all neutered on Gran Turismo Sport, but the funny thing about the game is, and I'm sure there are people who would disagree, but even for someone like me who loves insane top-end speed, I mean, after all, that's how the channel got started on Gran Turismo 6, it still feels justified to make them slower, because unlike something like the TVR Speed 12, which was just neutered for no apparent reason, everything is now neutered, because it makes them all feel more realistic, and that's cool. At least it's still more of a level playing field, with certain cars being justifiably better than others. Now, speaking of being better than others, there are certain ways in which you would assume that the R34 would be superior. For instance, how easy it is to drive straight off the bat, and especially in fully tuned form where both cars are putting out over 900 horsepower. That's true, the R34 is definitely easier to drive. But the difference is, and maybe this is just me again, but I'm sure there are others who feel the same way, with the R34 to some degree, regardless of upgrade level, it feels as if you can very quickly get a really good lap out of the car for your respective skill level. But if you keep running the R34 lap after lap, you might improve it, but not usually by much, because the car is so good and you can get your bearings with it so quickly that you'll pretty much set your best lap pretty soon, and then if you do make improvements, they'll be very, very slight. Maybe that's just me, but that's the way I find the GTR to be. With the Supra, on the other hand, which we'll get into more in a second, that's not the case. It is that a little bit different. Now, the best advantages of the R34 are, of course, the all-wheel drive, which, consider that an advantage if you will. I know some people don't. But the simple fact is, it does give you more grip, it does categorically make it quicker off the line, so it has its definite advantages. The pricing's still very good, 61 grand, which is more than the Supra, but is the same as it was on Gran Turismo 6. It's powerful, it's easy to use, it's incredibly quick, it's a good all-rounder, but we kind of already knew that. How then does it compare to the Supra? Well, the Supra, in a funny kind of way, almost feels now like more of a wild card, because we already knew what to expect from a Supra up until Gran Turismo 6, because the formula didn't really change that much. There were non-premiums, they basically looked the same ever since Gran Turismo 3 or 4, nothing really changed that much, apart from the overall look of the game. The ability that the Supra had was constant. Even as far back as Gran Turismo 2, it was pretty much the same level of car. Now though, with the full premium treatment, who knows what could happen? It could make it fantastic, it could neuter the car. So how does it compare? Well, of course, I have broken down both the Skyline and the Supra in individual reviews anyway, but it goes without saying that the Supra is a more challenging car to drive than the R34 when tuned to its limit. Because having 900 horsepower going through only the rear wheels is of course going to be more challenging than 900 horsepower going through all four wheels. That's just the way it is. And of course the only way that that would be different is if the Supra had some other kind of advantage, for instance significantly more downforce, or wider tyres, or a ground effect fan, or something like that. That would make a big difference. Or of course, if you turn traction control on. Now I considered doing that. I considered having the occasional spat of traction control exiting corners to give the Supra that little bit of a leg up compared to the all-wheel drive advantage of the Skyline, to make it a little bit more of an even playing field. But in the end I decided against that, not because it's necessarily a wrong thing to do, I just didn't feel like it. I wanted to keep it as pure a comparison as possible, and also, in a weird kind of way, it's more of a level playing field if you don't use it, because although the Skyline does have all-wheel drive, that's just the way it is. It's just a bit different to me to use traction control. I'm sure there are people who would disagree, and I would hear that argument out. As far as the Supra's overall ability, it's definitely a more challenging car to push to the limit, there is no doubt there. It's no way near as beginner-friendly, but it does have some very distinct advantages. For a start, it is cheaper. Secondly, it's faster. For top-end speed, you can see from these replays that the Supra can get to a higher speed down the straights, and although the speeds of each car are different, in particular compared to Gran Turismo 6, both cars are about 30 to 40 miles per hour slower than they were before, they do still compare in a similar-ish kind of way. Not exactly, the difference isn't the same, but the Supra is still quicker, just like it was back then. Whereas now it's more like 10 miles per hour quicker, whereas on Gran Turismo 6 it was like 20 or 30 miles per hour quicker. So there is a difference, but it does still have that advantage. Overall, the Supra is much more of a challenge to push to its limit, but as I said with the Skyline, you pretty much set a good lap and then just vary around that. With the Supra, the difference is you do feel that each lap that you push it harder and get it a little bit better around corners, that you can keep refining the lap. Now, of course, only to a certain point, but that feeling, for me at least, was definitely there. So, the final question that remains, of course, now that you've seen the ending lap times, at least for me personally, how do they compare on paper? Well, let's find out. So as usual, we of course start off with the price. As I already said, the Supra is the cheaper of the two at 45 grand, so we'll give that one the point there. It's pretty easy. As far as class though, they're actually both very good. They can go between N300 all the way up to N900, which is a really nice range to have, but they are both the same. So, as usual, you could give neither of them a point, or in my case, we'll give both of them a point. As far as engine capacity, of course this is the most controversial one because people always say, well, the biggest engine isn't necessarily better. Of course not, that's why I said it's top trump style. But, as is top trump style, biggest is, for the fun of it, best. So, as usual, we'll give the bigger engine the point, which on this occasion is the Supra, but not by much, a 3 litre compared to a 2.6. As far as power though, it swings straight back the other way in favour of the GTR by 10 horsepower, so not a huge margin. Both are very powerful cars though. As far as torque, not surprisingly at all, it swings straight back the other way, just like it did on Gran Turismo 6, in favour of that Supra with over 1,000 pound-feet, almost 1,100 pound-feet in fact, one of the highest in the game, especially for a road car. As far as weight, very interestingly, both cars have increased by quite a lot. The Skyline in particular though is around 80 kilos heavier now. Now the Supra is also heavier, but it hasn't fared as badly as that. It weighed about 1,208 before, now it's 1,268. So about 60 kilos more for the Supra, about 80 kilos-ish more for the R34. And of course, overall that means that once again, just like on Gran Turismo 6, the Supra gets the point. But of course, having rear-wheel drive instead of all-wheel drive alone saves that little bit of weight in comparison. And as far as horsepower per tonne, of course, it does have the much lower weight, and A 10 horsepower advantage isn't enough to give the Skyline the advantage here, because still, for horsepower per tonne, it does fall in favour of the Supra. So overall, how does that mean they compare? Well, funnily enough, it's actually, in an overarching sense, the exact same result as on Gran Turismo 6, wherein the Supra is stronger on paper, whereas the GTR is stronger in practice, with a lap time of a 1:55.2 to a 1:57.6 for the Supra, but not as massive a margin as you might expect. That's pretty good on the part of the Supra. Overall though, last time the Supra got 5 points to the Skyline's 2. On this occasion, the Supra actually wins by more, 6 points to the Skyline's 2. And if you discount the fact that both of them have the same class range, which of course is just an equal point anyway, so it means nothing, then the Skyline actually only has one advantage, and that is power. Pretty interesting. The Supra is cheaper, has a bigger engine, more torque, it's lighter, and has a better horsepower per tonne. So very interesting to see just how one-sided the on-paper numbers are, but then how drastically different that is when you actually take them out on the track. And of course the all-wheel drive alone makes a massive difference, probably the single biggest difference you could strongly argue between the two. So it's interesting to see how the cars are different, radically so in some cases, such as weight, but they still represent the same kind of ideals as you'd want them to, and also represent their respective fandoms very well, because although the Supra wasn't quicker, it was quicker for top speed. So on the right track, you could put that to good use. Overall then, a very interesting battle, and of course we'll feature more JDM battles down the line as well. Maybe even if they add the older NSX, that would be a pretty nice comeback as well, especially with the RX-7 in there. But that's it for this match. Of course, I'll see you guys next time. If you'd like to see more Rivals matches, both on GT Sport and older Gran Turismo games, you can click through to see those at the end of this video. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.